on the
I started recording.
Oh, you started? Great.
Yeah, I'll go through the slides, introduction slides.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Fall 2020 seminar series, November 4 seminar. And this is graduate students community leadership team for academic year 2021. Roshan and Rachel are co-chairs. Avinash, Rajmohan, and I are taking care of publicity. Here is our support team and the correspondents, Robert and Farouk. Farouk is our faculty advisor. And we meet every Fridays at 4 p.m. So you are very welcome to join. We meet through Zoom. So if you want to have the link of the Zoom, just email Rachel and Roshan. And for any other communications, the time can be set based on your availability. And this is the way that you can join us. If you can join us, we can increase our attendance and increase our visibility through the campus and raise funds. So you are very welcome to scan this QR code and just use your OYO ID, and then congratulations, you are a GSC member. And this is our Facebook page. We post all the seminars, any information about updates about GSC and the department and the College of Engineering on this website, on this page. This is our YouTube channel that we've started to upload our recordings. We are inviting speakers from all around the world, legendary, outstanding researchers. So you can find their talks by just scanning this QR code or going through this channel. And we have a Dave and Susan Bird team room that we get together there. You can also use it as your study room. And if you need to reserve it, just email Roshan or Rachel that I provided the emails. And we've put the slides on the chat box so you can access later on. We have two upcoming events in November 11 and November 18. On November 11, Thirumalai Venkatasan will talk about frontier research issues in ultra-low energy memory store design. And Shani Pandya will talk about entrepreneurship, why start early. So you can see that we have a wider variety, a wide range of topics that we are talking about it. And we have a sign sheet that you can please go ahead and sign it. It's in the chat box. We really appreciate that. And today we have Professor Gérard Cachon from Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Cachon studies supply chain management, operation strategy, and pricing with a focus on how technology transforms competitive dynamics and enable novel business strategies. He's an Informs Fellow, a fellow and former president of the Manufacturing and Service Operations Management Society, MSOM in short, and the former editor-in-chief of Management Science and MSOM journals. He has authored 2 textbooks along with Christian Terwiesch, Operations Management, 2 editions, and Matching Supply and Demand with Demand, an Introduction to Operations Management, 4th edition. These books have been used in undergraduate MBA and executive MBA courses at Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania, as well as at numerous other business schools throughout the world. His articles have been published in management science, manufacturing and service operations management, marketing science, operations research, and the Quarterly Journal of Economics and Harvard Business School. And today he's going to talk about a very important questions in online service platforms, whether servers or the platform should set the prices. With that, Professor Cachon, the screen is yours. Please welcome Professor Cachon.
Thank you very much. Let me, I'm going to try to, let's see, share via cable and voila. Okay, so hopefully you guys are seeing my my iPad here with my slides on it. Thank you very much for everyone for inviting me to give this talk, and thank you for doing the introductions in the beginning. That gives me a sense of the diversity of interests that are in the audience, which is quite expansive and fascinating. And it also tells me that the kind of research I'm presenting might not be exactly the style of research that you're typically doing, because you're working on you're working on important things, other important things. So as I'm going to give my talk, I'm going to keep that in mind, that I want to, try to give this as a talk that might be of interest to somebody who, has a tradition in business schools and competitive markets and dynamics, but also somebody who's just interested in engineering platforms and things of that nature. So hopefully I succeed. As I go along, I welcome interjectory comments. Just speak up and ask me a comment, say, hey, I didn't understand what you just said. Please, explain that a little bit more, or elaborate on something. Let me see, I'm going to try to show the chat on my screen. So if you have you could also try to throw a chat comment on, and I'll see if I can pay attention to that. If I somehow blanking out and don't pay attention to your chat, then somebody else just chime in and say, hey, pay attention to the chat, or something like that, okay? And let's see, so I should also mention that this is joint work with two really good scholars. Tolga Dizdare is a PhD student at my school. He is going to be on the job market next year. So this is kind of starting off on his early work in his dissertation. And Jerry Tsoukalos, who's at Boston University. And I've known Jerry for quite some time now, but this was the first time we've had an opportunity to collaborate on a project. Okay, so I guess I'll just start off with sort of the most basic of questions. Why am I even doing this, right? So why study pricing control on platforms? And just so I'm not using too much jargon, when I say the word platform, I mean things like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, Upwork, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and then there's some blockchain ones that are there also. I mean, we're talking about sort of this explosion of the last 10 or 15 years of these companies, these platforms that have established marketplaces that bring together people, and we're going to call them servers in our work, and customers. And then servers could be providing, I don't know, artsy little things on Etsy, or they could be providing transportation services as an Uber, or they could a bedroom as an Airbnb. They could be doing freelance work. TaskRabbit would be, set up my IKEA furniture, all these kinds of things. Okay, so that's the context of what we're studying is platforms. And we're going to study pricing in platforms and why. Well, the first reason I have here is variation in actual practice. Some platforms set prices, some platforms let their server set the price. So anytime you see variation in practice out there, that as a scholar, you say, okay, what's going on? Why do we have some variation? The next one is what I call regulation, which is, if you've been following the news about platforms, a big issue is, are the people who work on platforms employees or are they contractors? And many of the platforms argue that they're contractors. Many governments in Europe and the United States. For example, California passed a law called AB5 and Proposition 22, debating about, are they contractors or employees? The difference is if somebody's a contractor, means you can't train them, you can't tell them how to do their business, but you also don't have to pay for their health care, and you don't have to pay unemployment insurance and a few other little things. If they're an employee, then you can train them, you can tell them when to show up to work, you have to cover their health care costs if they're full-time employees, which is a big if, but so there's many people out there that want these gig workers, as they're sometimes called, to fall under the rubric of employees. So they've been trying to push legislations to do this. In particular, in California, England passed a law recently, or saying that Uber drivers are employees in London and they're not contractors. One of the things that distinguishes between a contractor and an employee is that a contractor is allowed to perform their own business, that you're not telling them what to do. And so pricing becomes relevant to that story. Some people will argue that if the person can't have control over prices, then they're not a contractor. And so if you want them to be labeled as a contractor, you have to give them control over pricing. Hence, the issue of, well, what's the consequence if you are a platform like Uber who controlled pricing, but you want them to be considered contractors? And if the governments are saying if they're going to be contractors, you have to give them pricing power, what's the implication of that pricing power? Okay. And a third reason is technology. And that's coming in from sort of the blockchain technology that's out there. There are now, for example, instead of Dropbox, which is a platform, you can think of Filecoin is storage. These are where people now are going. There's no platform per se. There's no central platform. There's just a blockchain code that is making all the transactions credible and regulating the marketplace, but without any central agent kind of controlling it. And so what's the consequence of having no central agent controlling pricing? Again, that's part of our study. So that's why we're interested in this topic. So more formally, when is central control of pricing or decentralized, delegated control of pricing better for the platform, better for the customers, better for the servers? So under what conditions should we do one or the other is the first question, which has not been addressed before in the literature. And then the second one is, okay, are there simple pricing mechanisms that exist that allow a platform to enjoy the benefits of both approaches? Can you have your cake and eat it too? Can you delegate control of pricing to the servers on your platform and yet also get the benefits of centralized control by being smart about how you design your pricing? So that's the second question. I'm going to answer both of these for you today. Okay. So let me just kind of, architects will say form follows function. I believe that in research, the core elements of a theory kind of dictate what you're going to get from this model, from this result. So let me tell you what those key elements are. So the first one that we have that's crucial from what we're thinking is that servers have private information about their own costs. So I'm going to use the Uber, Lyft. I'm going to use ride sharing as my sort of prototypical example. I think this is broader than that, but it's just easier for me to have one context to speak in. So if I'm going to be a driver, some days my daughter might have a softball match. Other days there's nobody in the family that cares about me, and I just want to drive because I need to make some money. So there's going to be variation in these costs, and there's no way the platform is going to know who wants to drive at this hour in this part of the city today or not, right? So that's private information. Next, servers are small, but they can regulate the quantity they offer. So whether or not I drop out of providing my ride sharing services, in the grand scheme of things in Philadelphia, it's not going to matter. There's 400 cars on the road. If me drop out, that's 1 out of 400 cars. Maybe there's thousands of cars on the road. So I know that I'm a small player, but I can choose to work 10 hours a week, or I can choose to work 40 hours a week on the platform. And so I can regulate how much capacity I give to the platform. So as a platform, you know that none of the servers have much control over sort of what happens in the grand market, but they do have a lot of control over their own micro decisions, like how much time to give to the platform. Okay. Next, the server share of demand depends on the price relative to the average price. So we call this a server competition effect. This is quite intuitive. This basically says that if I'm going to have a platform with a bunch of people posting prices, the people who post the lower price will get more demand. I mean, I don't think it's controversial, right? If you, as a customer, if you got to see a bunch of prices and the service is somewhat differentiated, but not too differentiated, you're all else being equal, the one server that gives a lower price is going to get a little bit more chance of getting your business, okay? So this is pretty typical. This is how most markets work. When you have competitors, if one person lowers their price, that generally increases their demand compared to everybody else. But we think that there's another important effect that goes on in platforms. And what we call this is the platform attractiveness effect. And what this means is that the customers that are deciding whether or not to be a member of a platform, a participant in a platform, they form expectations about what the overall pricing is on the platform. And that's going to influence their propensity to participate in the platform. And therefore, the overall demand on a platform depends on how attractive the platform is in general. We call it the platform attractiveness effect. So, for example, if Uber prices were always $400 a ride, and people started going, oh, sometimes it's 300, sometimes it's 400, sometimes it's 500. Yeah, but that's crazy expensive. I'm not even going to bother looking, right? So overall demand on the platform would decline. Similar like Airbnb. Oh, these people charging what for their 2-bedroom apartment? Where? Like, no way. I'm not going to even bother looking at Airbnb. But if you start going to Airbnb and you start saying, wow, I got a great room for $30 tonight. That's a good platform to do business with, right? So it's not the one price of any server that matters. It's kind of the whole entire affect of, or kind of the overall valence is a better word, of the platform that matters. And we think both of these effects are relevant, right? So as a server, you don't want everybody else to be too competitive, but at the same time, you want to participate in a platform that's attractive because there's just going to be more customers on a platform that's attractive, right? Okay, so I'm going to refer back to these elements as I'm going through because I think they're critical. Right? So the way I kind of handle research in the econ business world space is we set up a model. We have agents in the model, and they can choose certain actions, and we let them play, and they all have we require things like they all choose things that are optimal given their information and their choices. And then we have to look for equilibria in the sense that everybody is doing what they think everybody else should be doing. And if everybody does that, then everything will happen as they expect it to happen. So there's consistency going on. So we have a large number of servers, I mentioned it already. They offer differentiated service. So it doesn't mean that the person who posts the lowest price gets every bit of demand. So there's some variation. People post different paintings in Etsy, and not everybody likes everybody's painting, right? They all have their own costs, and we're just going to make it simple. It's a uniform draw of from 0 to 1. We generalize that later, and they choose a quantity. It could be 0. It could be like the server says, I really don't. My cost of serving today is pretty high. The prices on the market are pretty low. I'm just going to drop out of the market, right? I'm not going to participate. So we got one platform, and the platform chooses the compensation structure, how these servers are going to get paid, and how the customers are going to get charged is also a function of the platform. The platform could set a single price, which is typical in the ride-sharing industry, or you could allow the servers to choose their own price, which would be typical, for example, with lodging, right? Okay, so that's the agents and actions. The key thing here is how do we model demand? How do we integrate these two effects that I've talked about? Right. So the server competition effect, which means each server gets more demand if their price is lower, but also the platform attractiveness effect, which means each server gets more demand if the platform is more attractive as a whole to customers. So we do this by saying that the quantity that a driver is going to get with cost C, there's going to be some base cost. It's going to be downward sloping in the overall price in the marketplace. So P bar is the average price. So this is, if you've taken Econ 101 as an undergraduate, demand supply curves, downward sloping demand curve, right? It's just, okay, if prices on the marketplace are higher, demand is going to be lower, okay? And this is going to be regulated by this parameter beta. We have another parameter gamma that regulates the service competition effect, which is you get more demand as a server if your price is lower than the average. So if there's some average price out there and you're lower, you get more demand. If your price is higher, you get less demand, okay? And what is that P bar? Well, it's just the weighted average price that's being served in the marketplace. So you can think of P bar as the average price a customer pays. So if on average, customers get an average price on a rideshare platform that's pretty good, there'll be lots of demand on that platform, okay? And if it's kind of high, well, that's going to be a lot less demand on the platform for the servers to take, right? So note, Q, each server's demand is going to be a function of the average price, but then the average price is a function of how much each server posts their prices and their demand. So we're going to look for circularity or equilibrium. All right, so there's sort of two key demand regimes here that are critical. The first one is what we call sort of the more traditional retailing regime. This is when this gamma parameter is bigger than this beta. The important thing to note here is that if we're in this regime, as a server, I want the other servers to raise their prices, because if they raise their prices, then my price looks more attractive and the service effect, competition effect dominates, and I get more demand. And this is like traditional retailing. Like if you're Best Buy competing against Walmart in electronics, if Walmart lowers their prices, this is not good for Best Buy, right? It's just, it never is. Like Kroger and Safeway, if Kroger raises their prices, this is only going to send more demand to Safeway. This is what you typically think of in retailing. But when you have small servers and you have platforms, the platform attractiveness effect could dominate. This beta could be bigger than this gamma, meaning that ironically, you might want your other servers to lower their prices, because if they lower their prices, the platform becomes more attractive. There's more demand on the platform. And so while it's harder to steal share from everybody else, you're still stealing share in a bigger pond, right? So it's sort of like, yeah, I'd like to be able to steal as much as I can. That's the competition effect. But at the same time, if there's just a lot of demand out there because the platform is super attractive, then that's going to be good for me. And to make the platform attractive, everybody else has to lower their prices, right? And so you'll see that these two regimes are going to be important to understand the results. And also, I distinctly think that this second regime is unique to platforms. It's not common in retail markets, but it is in platforms. Okay, so what's the sequence of events in this game that we're going to play? Well, the platform sets their prices and their fees. Everybody observes what everybody is assigned. They also observe their own costs. Then they choose their quantities and prices, if they're allowed to choose their prices as servers. And then demand happens and payments are made. So this is not a dynamic model. We're not considering multiple periods. We don't have to. It's just this is enough to capture the effects that we're interested in. Okay. So let me just pause a second, because I've just described the model. Are there questions, about subtleties about anything about the model before we move on? I'm happy to back up and to just explain something else or justify something, or let me pause for a second here.
Any questions?
Okay.
You can put also the questions on the chat box.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, if questions come up later, I have no problem backing up to doing this. So let me just kind of move on here.
Actually, I have a question. The four key elements that you talked about previously,
Yeah.
Are you considering in the formula, in the equation, all those 4 key
Yes.
elements?
Yes. Yep, we are. So servers have private information about their costs. So they get it, they observe their costs. And as the platform, I just know the distribution of costs. I don't know what the actual cost is of any particular server. We are going to assume that the servers are all small.
Excuse me, is it the assumption, the distribution of the cost? We assume that we know the distribution of the cost?
Yes. So we know the distribution of the cost. So there's not a level of ambiguity here where we have a distribution on distributions. So I just know that costs are uniformly distributed among my servers, but if I randomly pick a server, I don't know what their particular costs are in a day. Because if I did, I could say, oh, you guys have the lowest cost, you work today, you guys have the highest cost, no, you don't work today, right? So that's but I can't do that because I don't really know who has higher costs and who doesn't, who has the softball match and who doesn't, who needs the money and who's like, say, I'm kind of okay with my money right now, So the platform can't collect that information. So yeah, but all those things are baked in there. Okay. Let me I'm going to kind of briefly kind of hit you with the literature. There's a lot of literature already on sort of if you have a network of firms in a supply chain, the upstream firms might want to control the prices of the downstream firms. However, that was considered illegal. But then there was reasons in economics in which it was said, well, maybe there's actual consumer benefits for things like manufacturer suggested retail prices. And then the Supreme Court weighed in on this. All of this is fascinating literature. All of it kind of assumed a small number of downstream retailers, each with market power, which is a very different setting than we have, which is a bunch of a platform with a bunch of servers, many, none of them have market power. There's some work on asymmetric information and supply chains, but nothing in the context of platforms. It's almost usually like one buyer and one supplier. And it's things like, I'm going to procure a gasket from you for my engine. I don't know how much what your cost is to produce that gasket. So then I can send you a contract in which we can negotiate the gasket prices. It's a very different context, but it does include asymmetric information. Huge literature that's exploding right now on platforms. It's just an exciting area right now in terms of work. So if you notice, most of the dates here on this page are relatively recent. Many focus on platform setting prices, fixed prices, and they work on matching. So it could be literally matching in the sense of like if you're running a dating platform, like which person A should get matched with which person B kind of thing. But it could also be in ride sharing, which car to send to which rider request. We don't worry about that in this paper. There's work on optimal fee structure of a platform with centralized pricing. I did some work on, for example, surge pricing. Under what conditions is surge pricing beneficial or not beneficial in a marketplace? Who benefits from it and why do they benefit from it? But that was all assuming that the platform had complete control over the pricing. There's some work on spatial competition. So should your price be on one side of the city be different than the other side of the city? Again, but assuming centralized pricing, just one agent choosing the prices. There is some work that does decentralized pricing, like assuming everybody gets to choose their own prices, but then it doesn't consider what happens if you centralize the pricing. So that it's missing that other piece. Recent work on using quantity discounts for employee retention on platforms. So if you're on the Uber or Lyft platforms and you drive more for them, they will give you bonuses. Why? Well, the argument is it's an employee retention story, that they were more likely to continue working for Uber or Lyft if you give them these bonuses. We have no retention in our model, so that's not what we're talking about. There's a decent number of papers on control of decision rights, like who should choose certain actions, but I don't want to go into the details of these papers, but they're really different contexts from what we do. There is a recent paper that's quite nice that looks at contractors versus employees. So let's say you are a platform and you can hire contractors or you can hire employees. The downside of an employee is that you have to give them a certain number of hours every week. The advantage of a contractor is that you can have them flexible in terms of they only work when you have work to give them. And so this paper is kind of figuring out what's the optimal mix of these two. Okay. We don't actually look at this issue of contractors versus employees. I did use it as part of my motivation, and that was because if you want your workers to be considered contractors, you may have to, according to some regulatory agencies, give them pricing power. But we're not going to talk about the explicit benefits of contractors versus employees. And now there's also, again, look at, dates here, 2020 and 21, looking at distributed ledger technology, blockchain technologies. And that's a really fast growing literature right now, trying to understand how does blockchain change markets. But none of them consider centralized pricing as an alternative. So again, they're missing that kind of main tension. So let me kind of give you the results. And I still have some notation just to tell you that there's some academic rigor to all of this, but I won't go through all of the nasty details. So we'll start off with centralized pricing first. So in a centralized pricing system, there's only one price. So the average price in the marketplace is selected by the platform. The platform needs to make some money. So what we're going to assume here is that the platform has chosen a commission contract. I will set the price. You will decide how many hours you're going to work, and I'm going to take fee percent of your revenue, let's say 20, 25%. And there'll be some cap on your cost, at which point you say, you know what? I don't really want to work on this. If you're going to take 20% of the market and this is the price you're charging, it's just not worth it to me. I jump out. So anybody whose cost is greater than C hat is out of the market. Anybody who's going to cost less than C hat says, yeah, okay, it's not the greatest deal because you're taking 25% of my money. However, I'm still better than nothing. I'm going to participate, right? And so this problem is not that hard to solve. We can show there exists a unique optimal price and commission rate for the platform. Okay. The one that's trickier is the one that has a lot more circularity to it. Like we're looking for an equilibrium in this setting where, so let me walk you through this. So this is the profit a server gets is going to be equal to, this is the proportion of the revenue they keep. So fee goes to the percent goes to the platform. They get to keep 1 minus fee of the price that they post. They have to subtract off their costs, which can be either opportunity costs or explicit costs like fuel and maintenance. And then remember, this was the quantity that they get. They're going to get a quantity that's going to be decreasing in the average price in the market and increasing in their price advantage. Right? So we can solve for each server's cost, price as a function of their cost. We can then find the highest cost server, and we can make sure that it's consistent. So what I'm interested in is something like this. Each server says, I think this is what the average price is going to be on the marketplace. Given this average price and my cost, this is the price I'm going to post. If everybody's doing that, the average price in the marketplace has to be the average of everybody's decision in terms of what prices they're actually posting. So that's what the economists would call an equilibrium, right? So that's a little trickier, but we can show that there exists a unique decentralized price equilibrium. There's a unique commission rate, and we can maximize the platform's profits given this. So both models are tractable enough. Okay. Okay. So here's like kind of essentially the main result. What we have here, and I'm just doing it graphically, but we have a proposition that shows this also, which is let's hold the beta parameter constant. Then it doesn't really matter what the constant is. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to vary this gamma parameter, which on the x-axis, which is that's how easy is it for a server to steal share from everybody else. So here it's very easy to steal share. Here it's hard to steal share. Okay. Then what I'm going to do on the y-axis is I'm going to plot the platform's profits under these two pricing regimes, service and platform pricing. When the platform chooses a price, the amount of the strength of the competitive effect goes completely away. I mean, because there's only one price in the marketplace, so nobody can steal share. So there is no impact in terms of the platform's profit with respect to this gamma parameter if they take charge, if they can take control. And then what we see here is that server pricing, the platform in this intermediate range does pretty well, does better if it lets the servers choose prices, but it does worse in the extreme cases. So what's going on here? Well, the advantage of server pricing is that each server can choose a price that reflects their own cost. If you've got low cost, they'll choose a pretty low price and serve a lot of demand. If you've got a high cost, you're not going to choose a really low price, but you'll choose a price that still makes it worth it for you to participate. And so you're not going to drop out. You're not going to lose. Or let me put it this way. Imagine the platform chooses a single price. That price is going to be too high for the low cost servers and too low for the high cost servers. Consequently, there's some inefficiency associated with the platform choosing a price because the one price cannot serve all. So when the beta and gamma parameters are about the same, when the platform attractiveness effect is about as strong as the server competitive effect, it's most important to make sure that the servers can choose prices that reflect their own personal costs. Right? And so that's this intermediate regime. However, if the market is super competitive, where it's really easy to steal share, what happens? Every driver goes out there and posts really low prices. And they have to everybody has to keep posting really low prices because everybody else is posting low prices. And so it's a race to the bottom. And customers love this, right? But the problem is, well, they love it from the point of view of price. They don't like it from the point of view is that as you do this, you're going to get a lot of servers that say, I'm out of here. Like, you know what, give a ride for $5? I'm not giving a ride for $5. I'm out. So you lose out on quantity. And then if the platform is collecting 20% of the price and everybody's posting really cheap prices, the platform is not collecting a lot of money. So that's a problem. The other side, what happens here is nobody can, if you cut your price, you don't get more demand. It's just it's one of these markets where your ability to steal demand from your competitors is small. So what do? Well, you're like, what the heck? I'll just charge a high price because see if I can get some demand because my demand isn't really that much of a function of my price. Everybody charges a high price. So now what do customers say? Man, I got to pay $60 for a ride? No way, I'm not going to do. So the whole platform attractiveness collapses here because every driver is charging high prices, making the overall platform less attractive. And the reason why this is happening is because they can't steal share effectively from everybody else. So essentially you're having market failures in both extremes. In this earlier extreme, you're getting people that they're not lowering their prices enough. And that's hurting the overall attractiveness of your platform. So the platform has to take charge and just say, okay, this is the price we're going to post people. On the other side, they're like, you guys are ridiculous. You're all posting ridiculously low prices. Okay, I'm going to take charge and bring some sanity to this. We're going to charge a little bit higher, and so that we can actually make some money here. The problem is, again, you pay a price that the one, pun intended, I guess, the one price you're choosing isn't really the right price for everybody. And so in the middle, when these effects are not super strong, you're better off with server pricing. So we really do get that some markets should go with server pricing and some markets should go with platform pricing. All right, so is there something smarter than a commission contract? And there's a whole science in economics about how to find an optimal mechanism in terms of these things. It's a little weird, and that's why somebody won a Nobel Prize for this idea. It's incredibly powerful, and it's been used since the 1980s, I guess it was, for a host of things. For example, if you're the FCC and you're selling wireless spectrums and you want to raise a lot of money for the government, this theory was used. Okay, so to kind of put it in context. But roughly the idea is this: you don't know their costs, but you ask everybody to report their costs. You then tell them this is the price that you're going to get, and this is how much this is how much you're going to pay. So this is, if you report cost C, this is the price you're going to post. And if you report cost C, this is the wage I'm going to, or the fee I'm going to charge you. And then the platform goes off and it optimizes this problem subject to the constraint that's called truth telling. Everybody's willing to post their true cost. And there's a whole theory as to why this is the case. But let's just put it this way. You can kind of write down an optimization problem, a linear optimization problem here, where the platform can figure out a mechanism that would set prices and wages and fees for each of the servers that would maximize the platform's profits. Right? So we can solve this thing, and you get these functional forms. Not so important for what they exactly mean right now, but let me go back to the graph I had before. This is the platform pricing, this is server pricing, and this top line is the optimal mechanism. So now the platform can have its cake and eat it too. It can let the servers choose their prices and maximize its profits under all circumstances. Wow, that's pretty cool. So what's going on that's different here? Well, the easiest way to see this is that in the decentralized pricing model, when you have commission contracts, the derivative of the prices that are posted with respect to the cost of the servers is a constant. It's independent of market parameters. But that's the mistake. It's not reflective of the market situation. In the optimal centralized pricing scheme, it becomes a function of the parameters of the marketplace. And so how steep or shallow the pricing curve is becomes a function of what's going on in the market. All right. Here's another way of looking at how the optimal mechanism is different. So what I've plotted here on the x-axis is the cost of a server. So this is a low-cost server. This is a relatively high-cost server. And then this is server profits on the y-axis. And then, as you would expect, low-cost servers make more money. And so this dotted line here is the slope of profits when you have just platform pricing. Okay, so low-cost servers make a lot, and then as their costs go up, they make less and less. When you have server pricing, you get more servers that are willing to participate. So this little area between the blue line is saying these servers are making some money. The problem is that they're also too high cost, and the servers here are making less money, and that's not so good. You want the low cost servers to make more money, and so the orange line kind of fixes both problems. That's the optimal mechanism. Okay. But you're like, man, that optimal mechanism that's so funky. I'm going to tell the servers you report your costs, and then given their cost reports, I'm going to tell them what price to charge. That seems so ridiculous. Well, it turns out you can implement this thing in a pretty simple way. And what we noticed is that low-cost servers tend to want to serve more market. They'll just drive more, right? And high-cost servers will drive less. So all you have to do is essentially come up with some kind of scheme that's a function of the quantity that the servers choose to offer into the marketplace. And under most parameters, and this is in particular when platform attractiveness is very important, this looks like a quantity discount, which is if you drive more, you have to pay the platform less, which encourages you to drive more. So think about what's the problem when if the platform attractiveness effect dominates. The problem is the servers are not lowering their prices enough. So you need to encourage them to lower their prices. So how do you do that? You give them a discount if they serve more, which encourages them to lower their prices. However, in the other extreme, if they're competing too aggressively, what do? You charge them a penalty for actually charge them a penalty for serving a lot, and that discourages the low-cost servers from taking money from the high-cost servers. You think, well, who does this? Well, Apple does. Apple does it with their App Store. So if your revenue is more than $1 million, you pay extra in royalties to Apple than when you don't. And this was actually the major contention in this lawsuit between Apple and Epic Games, which is the maker of Fortnite. So we've observed both of these in practice. And essentially, so our theory here is saying that if your platform, the servers are going to be too price competitive, then it becomes a quantity surcharge. But if the platform, they're not competitive enough, then it becomes a quantity discount. And that would actually optimize the platform. Oh, and I should also say, one important thing here. As a business school professor, I'm way too biased towards thinking about just the firm. I should be thinking about consumers and other stakeholders. Bias that I have, I'm sure, and I kind of have to kind of remind myself here. But it turns out servers actually do better with this scheme also. And that's because it kind of fixes the problems of the marketplace that they can't fix for themselves. And in many cases, especially when we're in this sort of platform attractiveness regime, consumers actually prefer this quantity pricing also, because what quantity pricing is doing in these platform attractives is encouraging servers to lower their prices and to serve more. So as consumers, you're getting more supply at lower prices. That's nothing, nothing to complain about as a consumer there. So what's nice about this is we can say that what's good for the goose is good for the gander in some sense here. What's good for the platform is actually good for the servers and good for the consumers, because essentially we're just the failure of the market is destroying value. We're fixing that failure. We're creating more value, and that's right. High tides raise all boats kind of thing. Okay, so let me give you some extensions and kind of final discussions and thoughts here. You say, oh, uniform 0-1 distribution. We know the costs are not distributed that way. Well, we extended this to beta distributions, which, if you remember, so this is what a uniform distribution looks like. A beta distribution kind of looks like a normal that's bounded by 0-1. The optimal contract is no longer linear, it's nonlinear. We've solved for the optimal linear contract in this setting, and it's basically like 99.9% as good as the optimal nonlinear. So everything goes through with this one. We do not think that how the costs among the servers varies matters at all. But what about this blockchain idea, fully disintermediated market? Well, in short, you still get this effect, right? Where for really high and really low competitive settings, the blockchain is not going to solve that problem. If you listen to the aficionados of blockchain right now, basically, it's going to cure cancer, it's going to cure climate change, it's going to solve every problem in the world that we have. No, no, it won't. Pricing dynamics in a marketplace are not necessarily something it'll cure, because the problem is the blockchain doesn't solve the problem that if you've got a market with lots and lots of small servers that none have market power, then that becomes an issue. Some people say, platforms, they don't maximize profits, they maximize throughput, because that's how you get money on Wall Street. It's not your profit that matters, it's your revenue growth. Same results we get, because if you're going to maximize revenue versus maximizing profit, well, revenue is, quantity is part of both, right? And then some other people might say, but you know what? You got a mistake here. You're assuming that the high cost servers and the low cost servers are basically equally good. So I'm roughly saying it's like in ride sharing, I think that's about right. I mean, whether or not somebody's driving a electric vehicle that's pretty cheap versus a gas guzzler that's expensive, it doesn't really, as a consumer, you don't really care about that too much. Okay. But Airbnb, if somebody's got a higher cost apartment, it's probably a better apartment. And so all else being equal, we expect that the correlation is going to be positive between costs and consumer value. If you're a higher cost server, that's because you've got higher quality product to offer. And our results, basically, what happens is, as you would kind of expect, is that this range kind of spreads out. So the range at which server pricing is optimal gets larger because it's more important that you let the servers choose the appropriate price when their value is correlated with their cost. But qualitatively, we're still getting the same kind of effect, that if the market's way too competitive or way too uncompetitive, the platform has to step in and choose the prices for itself. Okay, so what do I want you to take away from this talk? If the platform lets servers choose prices, this allows the platform to cater to heterogeneous server costs. The higher cost servers can post higher prices, lower cost servers can post lower prices, and that has some advantages. However, if the platform steps in and chooses the price, you lose that benefit of tailoring price to cost. However, you regulate the market a lot better. The servers are terrible at regulating themselves, so the platform can come in and regulate it for them. But there are ways in which you can do quantity discounts or quantity surcharges that will fix this problem, so you will be able to have your cake and eat it too. The platform can allow servers to choose prices and still get the benefits of regulating the market, so prices are neither too high nor too low for everyone involved. Right. All right. So there's my talk. I think I finished. I think we were given about an hour for the talk. So I guess that means I'm going to open this up to any final questions, comments, reactions. Things like, yeah, but what about this? Or, I don't know, what anything else you might prefer to ask about. Open for anything that might come up.
Sure.
Thank you, Gerard. The way that we go is we go first with the clarification questions. So if there is any question about like quick questions about any definition, any concept, any mathematics that is very quick, then we will go to the open question and longer questions, or the questions that needs longer answers. Let's start with our outsiders. If Dr. Hassanzadeh is, Dr. Hassanzadeh, if you have any questions, you are our guest.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks, Gérard, for the nice talk. I was just wondering if, sort of like, what if this kind of question, if we can consider price discrimination as a metric to gauge the performance of different systems. Discrimination, I mean, obviously, if we let the servers choose the prices, we have some benefits. But what if those prices are way too different, and that causes a little bit of problems when we, look from the customer side, if that's been addressed in the literature, or if it's worth basically considering?
I think it is worth considering. And I should let you know that this model that we have, where we have this notion of platform attractiveness, where we're trying to capture this idea that consumers care about the average price on a platform. I think you spoke to like what happens if there's lots of variation in prices out there. I've not seen another sort of piece of work that has captured that effect. We only measure the first moment here. Like, so what we're saying is that consumers care about the average price paid on the market. If consumers cared about the variance of prices on the market as well, that would be analytically probably would be a mess.
Right.
But that being said, we capture it indirectly. If the variance in prices are going up, that will change the average price paid in the marketplace. And notice we strategically chose to use the average price paid in the marketplace so that we're using the weighted average price. If a server posts ridiculously high prices and captures no demand, it has no impact on consumers, because they're like, oh yeah, there's always these nut jobs out there that are going to post $1,000 for their room. We ignore them. We pay attention to the ones that are posting $50 a night for their room, right? So we believe that kind of makes sense. It's that super high prices don't automatically scare away consumers. They only automatically scare away consumers if that's the only set of prices that are being posted and the only set of prices actually being paid. But the capturing an explicit cost for the variance, not in our model, and I tell you that would be really hard to add to the model. And we could do it numerically, but we would have to lose some, our theorems. We would lose our theorems.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Any other questions? Roshan?
I think I have a question, not probably from the perspective of mathematics, but so I was thinking of one thing. How is there any consideration of reviews, or is it possible that reviews can help the servers tell platform why the price they decide is appropriate? In that sense, would that help in deciding the platform, making sure that, as you said, for the services that they provide, that's an appropriate price for them? And probably first part this, I guess, then probably another question maybe.
So this idea of reviews, I throw that into the camp of how are these servers matched actually with consumers, right? Okay. And what we essentially we are, in some sense, being an economist is great as opposed to an engineer. Engineers, things actually have to work. And you can't just say let's imagine a steering wheel. No, it has to be a steering wheel.
Right.
The economists, we can take sort of the 10,000 foot view, or maybe I'm at 25,000 feet now. I don't even know. Right. I've essentially swept that under the rug. What I'm saying is that the only thing that matters that regulates how much quantity a server gets is their price relative to everybody else's price. And so this is kind of like, you can think of this conditional on, everybody posting reviews and everybody getting a certain set of reviews. If we had a competition that was based exclusively on reviews, it would be a different model.
Okay.
We are essentially saying that the reviews, they might be important, but what's critical is can one server A use reviews to attract more demand than server B? Now, if everybody gets a 4.99 out of 5, if you got a 4, you're not going to get any demand. But the problem is everybody's got a really high, and so it'll vary by market. Now, I would think, for example, like Airbnb, reviews are going to matter a little bit more. We tried to capture that a little bit with this model where we said the cost of the server is correlated with their value. So if you've got a nicer room, all else, if you post the same price as somebody else, you get more value. And you can think of that cost as either being, you collected better reviews, and so people can identify that you are actually higher quality. So we have it somewhat in the model, but it's indirectly in the model.
But from your personal experience, do you think these platforms generally experience any indulgence kind of? Because as a common person, as me myself, when I try to book an Airbnb, I always look for the best option. but sometimes the cheapest isn't the best because the neighborhood or just the services. And so I would want to pay a little bit more and feel more comfortable, right? But there would be other people, for them, that does not matter. Like they have the luxury to choose a better house. And so what percentage of that would do you see that kind of behavior on these platforms?
Well, the actual empirical of that is I don't have the data, but I agree with you. It's important to know. We capture that effect by saying if there's heterogeneity in the posted prices, it's not like every consumer just goes to the cheapest price posted.
Right.
That we think of these servers as being differentiated in some ways, where that means that if a server posts a higher price, they still will get some demand, all else being equal, less as they post a higher price, but they still get some because they're in a better location. They painted their room orange and somebody really likes an orange room, and like, okay, they found all these kinds of, there's a huge amount of idiosyncrasies and preferences.
Right.
So we have a model in our model really does capture this notion that if you cut your price, you'll get more demand, but it doesn't mean that every single customer is going to want your service just because you're epsilon cheaper than everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep. I see a hand up from Yilin. So Yilin, was a hand that has a question behind it?
It's me. So I have a question on this. I'm trying to understand the model. Like you have an orange line where in your slides, you have orange line for the cost and then blue solid line for the price. Well, sometimes when the price is below the cost, you did not make any benefits. But what if your demand is getting higher? Right now, you're just giving some lower price. So maybe there's some people want to buy it. So your demand was getting high. At that moment, maybe your cost will dynamic because demand is higher, cost is going to lower and lower. Would that your model can catch up that?
It doesn't right now. So I assume, for example, that your costs are linear in how many customers you serve. If you serve one customer, it's 30 cents a mile. You serve 40 customers, it's 30 cents a mile. It's entirely possible that would not be true in some platforms where the more you serve, the more efficient you become. Your cost, that could be added to the model. I don't think it would actually change the qualitative insights, but strictly speaking, right now, it's not in our model. Ours is a very simple cost structure, which is just my cost is a fixed number of miles or per minute driven or something like that, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I do 1 minute or if I do 5 hours. Now, of course, in ride sharing, it costs you something to get to the get to the low. You might not live in the center city. You then have to drive to center city. Then you start taking customers. Then you have to drive home, and so there's a bit of a fixed cost associated with starting up work. We don't include those costs. Yeah, that's not.
So you're saying that this demand is getting higher and higher. The cost will have some change, but not enough. So it's can be ignored.
The per unit cost stays the same. If we're dealing with lots of volume, so for example, I don't have this, there's a notion of if we triple the number of Uber drivers on the road, then they would start to bump, not literally bump into each other, but it cause congestion in the city. That would make each minute of work less profitable because they're spending more time sitting around doing stop and go traffic. That's not in our model, right? So we're assuming that if we change demand, we're changing it at a scale that isn't going to dramatically impact costs. Or another example could be, if you were doing a certain kind of volume, you might use one technology. But then if you go to a higher volume, you would switch technologies that have higher fixed costs, but lower variable costs. So that notion of switching, for example, in electricity production, if you're just going to fire on a plant on and off, you do it with natural gas. If you want to keep a plant running all the time, you do it with nuclear. But the cost of setting up a nuclear plant is exorbitant compared to a natural gas plant. so it's things like that. We do not consider technology regimes that could influence the costs. Potentially interesting question to extend this. We just haven't done it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Mhm.
Yep.
Any other questions? We have Dr. Prakash also as an outsider. Dr. Prakash, do you have any questions?
See, my talk was so clear that I'd left everybody without any questions.
Yes. But I also have a
No,
question. Just as a kind of follow-up questions for further maybe research. It's about like comparing different. Have you compared like some firms with each other to see how their policies fit in your model, or did you drive your model based on the behavior of different firms?
Yeah. So the motivation for our work really came from the ride sharing industry, because that's the one industry that has gone back and forth with respect to how they do pricing. In fact, Uber in California for a certain period of time, ran an experiment where they allowed drivers to set prices. And they did it because they were trying to head off regulations that would stipulate that the drivers are employees and not contractors. So their lawyer said to them, if you let them choose their own prices, your argument that they are contractors and not employees gets strengthened. And so why don't you run a test in California, and see what happens with the drivers and how they price. And maybe they'll do really well with their pricing, and we can then let them choose prices, and then we can go to the government and say, see, they choose prices, they're contractors. Well, they ran the experiment, and they then closed the experiment because they discovered that the drivers were pricing too high. And it's kind of like, imagine the following. You're a driver and you're driving on a Friday night, it's now midnight, and people are coming out of the bar and it's raining. Well, it doesn't usually rain in California now these days, but let's assume it's raining. Okay, so people are willing to pay a lot to get an Uber, right? Because they're like, I gotta go home. All right, so they're paying a lot to get an Uber, and so you post really high prices. But then the next week, people are like, oh, you know what? Let's find a designated driver, or let's leave before the last train, so we don't have to call this Uber, because last week they were charging ridiculously high prices for us. So that's what they discovered, that the Uber drivers were charging too much, and overall demand in those markets were dropping, which is exactly what our model would predict. Now, did we calibrate our model to their experiment? No, because they didn't give us data on the experiment. There's no way we're getting data on that experiment, because it has legal implications, antitrust implications for Uber. The lawyers are all over it. But at least what they reported publicly is very consistent with what our results are from the model. So it gets harder when we try to say, why does Uber do one thing and Airbnb does another? Because there's other things that are different between Uber and Airbnb than just this issue. So it would be a tricky empirical question to give a convincing argument for. It's much easier to do it within a particular platform, like Uber did with running the experiment, than across platforms. But essentially, the real world was our inspiration. But can we actually test this? That is an entirely other research project, I would think. Yeah.
Okay. And another follow-up question. I think this model is more fit to the cases that we can have decentralized pricing. For example, for a let's say in Uber or Lyft or Airbnb, these companies that they don't like or they don't want have the full control over their market, so they even don't know their contractors, their drivers, they don't pay them, they are not their employees. But how about like Amazon is a kind of like that, but Amazon is like more centralized. Can we fit this model or use this model to companies like Amazon as well?
Oh, you're talking about like an Amazon marketplace, right? Where, yeah, I'm a small retailer and I'm going to sell through Amazon.
Yes. There are also kind of contractors, and these days I see that even people started like selling the products of, let's say, a company in China. They are just sellers. They are doing nothing and online from their home. So
yeah,
I can even do that.
Yeah. I think marketplaces. I mean, if you're selling fishing rods and I'm selling paintings, we're not competing, right? There's no. These are separate markets, right? And so if we're dealing with separate markets, that happens to be when beta equals gamma approximately, and then server pricing is the way to go. Server pricing, because then what you want is you want to take advantage of that the servers know their own costs, and so they should post prices that are related to their own costs. And so I think in marketplaces, our model is consistent with it, that you should let the servers choose their prices, especially when the marketplace is servers that are not really even competing with each other all that much, especially when you're dealing with Amazon, where you have people selling, everything and anything, right? Apple with their App Store, that's interesting also, because again, it has a similar effect of like Amazon, where you have people, selling one kind of like a health app versus, a map app are completely different, right? I don't know. But Amazon, they charge quantity surcharges, because I think what they discovered was that large apps were taking too much share from the marketplace and they were being too competitive, and they wanted to dampen that competition. And so they charged people with high volumes more. I'm not quite sure, and I don't know enough about Amazon Marketplace's pricing, but I think they might also have quantity pricing also to some extent. So I even think in those markets, we're seeing a little bit of a flavor of our results, even in those markets.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anyone who didn't talk? Rachel, any questions?
Oh, you're putting people on the spot there.
Yeah, this is actually sorry that Dr. Mystery Frog had to leave because he's in an NSF panel. So this is what important. Yes, this is what he does. He asks for any takeaways, so any if we can relate our research to what the speaker presents. It's a kind of unusual way of getting questions or feedback, but it's a good way to involve others. Monik is also in computer science, and she's a doctoral student in computer science. Yeah, please.
She has her hand up.
Yes.
Yeah. If we still have time, I do kind of have one clarifying question as well too. Sort of with, so you're essentially trying to like regulate the marketplace to some extent, ideally to fundamentally benefit, the consumers as well as the servers and potentially the platformers too. I guess, would you say that like one goal of, because there's this notion of like a free market where essentially like the consumers will sort of weed out products that are useless or just not good and things like that. And kind of to like that Apple example that you're talking about with like Fortnite, where they were sort of making too much money, could part of the argument there just be that, you know, the consumers just like that app so much? Is it like, I guess, quote unquote, are they deserving of that excess revenue because they're, you know, producing something that's just so valuable to the consumers? And, you know, what's the line between sort of Apple determining that, no, you guys are actually making too much money versus like the value that you're actually adding?
Yeah, no, great questions. And that was, I mean, you could be an expert witness in the in that trial asking those questions, and I'm sure they had it. You know, that there is a trade-off, right? Because the server who's taking a large share of the marketplace is clearly providing value, because the, you know, the other, why would consumers not being forced to use that server, so they're the fact that they're using that server a lot is creating value, and so that's good, right? The problem is if that drives out of the marketplace a host of other potential servers that might be offering differentiated goods that could also provide value. And so what you're interested in as a regulator, and to some extent Apple or the owner of the platform, is not just like, do I have a couple of good servers who are really making a lot of money? More like, what's the, you know, is my collective ecosystem of servers providing a lot of quantity, a lot of value to the marketplace, right? So in this context of ride sharing, if you've got servers that have really cheap costs and they give all the rides, you're going to get people to drop out that have higher cost. If the rate at which the people who are dropping out is faster than the rate at which you're gaining from the low-cost servers, the net effect is negative on the marketplace. And so consumers are worse off. They're flocking. It looks like you've got a really strong competitor in the marketplace, but the total market isn't as healthy. I guess that's the theory that's going on, and that's the justification for doing the quantity surcharges. The other way it goes is that, you know, your low-cost servers aren't making enough money in this marketplace because they're not able to really, they have no incentive to really cost. In that Friday night example I gave you, even the low-cost servers charging a high price. But if they can do the more demand and they get lower fees to the platform, then they'll serve more customers. Well, how do you serve more customers? You cut your price, and can you do it? Well, you can do it because your costs are lower. So there, you actually want to encourage the competition, and so that's why we're getting these two effects. In some marketplaces, you need to encourage the competition for the benefit of everybody. In others, you have to dampen the competition. That being all said, you know, in the app market that you're talking about, there are other elements here, like the fixed cost of designing the app, that come into play, and the risks associated with designing the app. We don't have those in our model right now. I think they would be relevant in the app model. Are they relevant in ride sharing? No, not really, because, you know, ride sharing, you know, it's just buy a car and start driving. But in apps, well, you got to hire programmers and pay them a lot of money and do some market research and design a thing and build it. And yeah, there's the fixed cost of setting these things up is significant. So it's not a perfect fit for that market.
Yeah.
But,
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
yeah, I'll take it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, feedback, takeaways?
Well, thank you everyone for coming to the talk and being attentive listeners. And the questions have been asked, the comments are quite good. And also helped me think about how I want to position the work. If something comes up later, feel free to email me. Love to hear from anybody. Saying, hey, I thought of this later, and what do you think about this? Or I've done some work that's kind of similar. Please take a look at it. Love to do so also. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I have a takeaway that you have opened, I think, a new path for a new line of research, that a lot of questions that have been posed here, I think, is kind of further research gaps. They can be expanded more on it. So thank you so much for sharing your new research topic with us, and we have your information. If anybody has a question, we'll email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. All right, cheers. Have a good day.
Thank you.
I want
Bye.
to Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Dr. Hassanzadeh. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Prakash.
Yep,
Pleasure.
thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Have a nice day.